Welcome to Christian Formation. It's Father Ralph Strom presenting today one of these sessions in the series of the Rector's class entitled, What is Hell? I have two apologies to make before I continue. The one is my appearance. I went to the dermatologist last Friday and you can see the result. Hopefully it'll get better. The other apology is we had originally recorded this last Sunday, June 13th, between the 9 and 11 a.m. masses. But there was a camera failure. So I'm recording this now in the afternoon of Tuesday, June 15th for broadcast, I think, on Wednesday, June 16th at 6:30. But the reason I'm apologizing is there's no spontaneity in this. There's no congregation out there to cheer. No booze, just cheers. Well, here's the takeaway that I have from what I'm going to present, and I'll, of course, repeat it at the end. It's just four words. Hell is always popular. Let me say that again. Hell is always popular. You know, in our day-to-day conversations, just in our daily lives, hell serves as kind of an all-inclusive metaphor for all kinds of difficulties we might have. For example, if we have some kind of a task that's difficult for us, we say, well, this is hard as hell. Or hell is the extreme of some kind. It's hot as hell. And it's beginning to be summer here on the Gulf Coast, so you might want to say that pretty soon. So we throw it around in a totally non-religious sense, and we just incorporate it into our daily lives. Moreover, despite all we know from science and rationality, the idea of hell has not lost any of its importance in Western religious thought. The 2014 survey by the Pew Research Center found that 58% of American adults still believe in the existence of a place, quote, where people who have led bad lives and die without being sorry are eternally punished, unquote. The notion or idea of hell is as old as history itself. As far back as we have evidence of writing, there has been hell. So what I'm going to do in the rest of this presentation is kind of lay a foundation of what earlier civilizations have thought about hell, leading up to Judaism and Christianity. So let me offer a kind of a broad-stroked overview of some early historical notions of hell. In the ancient world, Mesopotamia was in the Fertile Crescent, where the Euphrates and Tigris rivers form this rich area for agriculture and so forth. In the ancient world, these Mesopotamians imagined a grim underworld as, I love this phrase, as the house of dust. Death haunted everyone all the time. Individual souls were not singled out for punishment. In the other world, the end of life brought the same bleak fate to everyone. Upon death, souls entered into the world of no return, the house of dust. Their souls were mere shadows. There's a long writing called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written around 2000 BC. In it, a Mesopotamian king undertakes a perilous voyage to discover the secret of immortality, to escape the fate of mortals, only to learn that is unattainable. Only the gods live forever. Ancient Egyptians believed in the judgment of the death god Anubis. But here the afterlife was a little less somber than in Mesopotamia. They believed that a person's experience in the next life was intimately bound with that person's conduct in this life. So that may sound a little familiar to us, doesn't it? Egyptians who lived according to the ethical requirement of what was called ma'at, meaning kindness and justice, could expect to enter the bountiful halls of Osiris, and the comparable place for us as Christians is heaven. The death god Anubis weighed a person's heart against a feather to measure whether he had been kind and or just. Those who did not meet the standards of Mahat faced a second terrifying death after their physical death. Flame-faced spirits waited to hack them asunder and cast them into pits of fire. Later, in Greek and Roman literature, we read of Hades. We've all probably heard that term. For the Greeks, there was no ethical judgment of ordinary souls in the underworld. The spirits of persons lived in grim Hades as, here comes one of those wonderful terms, listless shades, stripped of every part of their former selves except for their sad memories of the lives they had once lived. We've all probably heard of Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey, which is written around 700 BC. Tells the story of the decade-long voyage of Odysseus back to his home on the island of Ithaca after the Trojan War. He ventures to the threshold of the underworld to consult with the ghost of a famous seer, Tiresias of Thebes. In this story, the land of the dead is not deep beneath the earth, as previous civilizations seem to believe, but on a dark and distant shore, shrouded in mist and cloud. So let me read to you a little bit from the Odyssey, just to give you a flavor of the kind of language and images that are presented. Now the rest of the ghosts, the dead and gone, came swarming up around me, deep in sorrow there, each asking about the grief that touched him most. Only the ghost of great Ajax, son of Telamon, kept his distance, blazing with anger at me, still for the victory that I had won. So I cried out, but Ajax answered not a word. He stalked off toward Erebus into the dark to join the other lost departed dead. Yet now, despite his anger, he might have spoken to me, or I to him, but the heart inside me stirred with some desire to see the ghosts of other dead and gone. And I saw Tantalus too, bearing endless torture. He stood erect in a pool as the water lapped his chin. Parched, he tried to drink, but he could not reach the surface. No, time and again the old man stooped, craving a sip. Time and again the water vanished, swallowed down, laying bare the caked black earth at his feet. Some spirit drank it dry. And over his head leafy trees dangled their fruit from high aloft. Pomegranates and pears and apples glowing red, succulent figs and olives swelling sleek and dark. But as soon as the old man would strain to clutch them fast, a gust would toss him up to the lowering dark clouds. From the Odyssey. A few centuries later, Socrates, who lived from 470 to 399 BC, could imagine a fate in which the souls of the dead endured pain for crimes committed while they were alive. So let me read you a little bit from Socrates, the great philosopher. This then is the nature of the regions under the earth. Now when the dead come to the place to which each is conveyed by his divine guide, they first submit themselves to judgment, both those who have lived fine and pious lives and those who have not. Those judged to have lived a middling kind of life journey to the river Acheron, where they board the vessels available to them and use these to journey to the lake. There they reside and undergo purification, each as he deserves, paying penalties to absolve him from any crimes committed and receiving honors for any benefits bestowed. And from among these but those judged to have done exceptionally well toward living piously are the ones who are freed from these regions here within the earth and are released as if from prisons, moving to that pure place of residence above and dwelling on the surface of the earth. And from among those very people, those who have purified themselves sufficiently well by means of, here it is, philosophy, Socrates, dwell entirely without bodies for a time thereafter, and come to reside in places still more beautiful than those, places that it is not easy to show you, and not in the time we presently have. But it is for the sake of these things we describe that one must do everything to ensure one's share of goodness and wisdom in one's life. Fine is the prize, and the hope great. from Socrates. The Roman poet Virgil, who lived from 70 to 19 BC in an epic poem called, and you've all heard of this as well, the Aeneid, depicted the underworld as a place where ordinary people could expect to suffer tortures for a litany of offenses. For example, encouraging family fights, fraud, hoarding wealth, killing someone over adultery, treason, breaking oaths. This poem was very influential and it was a mainstay of the Roman educational system for centuries. I found this interesting in my search. Even early Christian monks learned the Aeneid by heart and imitated its style in their own poems. Virgil's hero, Aeneas, ventures into the realm of shadows to speak with the shade again, of his dead father. Let me read to you a couple selections from the Aeneid. On they went, those dim travelers under the lonely night, through gloom and the empty halls of death's ghostly realm. Like those who walk through woods by a grudging moon's deceptive light, when Jove has plunged the sky in dark and the black night drains all color from the world. There in the entryway, the gorge of hell itself. Grief and the pangs of conscience make their beds, and fatal pale diseases live there, and bleak old age. Dread and hunger, seductress to crime, and grinding poverty, all terrible shapes again to see. And death and deadly struggle and sleep, twin brother of death, and twisted, wicked joys, and facing them at the threshold. War, rife with death, and the fury's iron chambers, and mad, raging strife, whose blood-stained headbands knot her snaky locks. A huge throng of the dead come streaming toward the banks. A huge throng of the dead come streaming toward the banks. Mothers and grown men and ghosts of great-souled heroes, their bodies stripped of life, and boys and unwed girls and sons laid on the pyre before their parents' eyes. As thick as leaves in autumn woods at the first frost that slip and float to earth, or dense as flocks of birds that wing from the heaving sea to shore when winter's chill dries them over the waves to landfalls drenched in sunlight. There they stood, pleading to be the first ones ferried over, reaching out their hands and longing toward the farther shore. But the grim ferryman ushers aboard now these, now those, others he thrusts away back from the water's edge. Aeneas, astonished, stirred by the tumult, calls out, "Tell me, Sibyl, what does it mean, this thronging toward the river? What do the dead souls want? What divides them all? Some are turned away from the banks, and others scull the murky waters with their oars." Some more of that wonderful imagery from this epic poem, the Aeneid. Now, the earliest Christian writers reflect the Greek and Roman influence. They don't write as a blank slate. They have had their own education and they know some of this stuff. So they reflect the Greek and Roman influence. That is, that the souls of the dead lived in a realm either beneath the earth or on some distant shore, Hades, where particularly wicked individuals suffered eternal punishment. But the Hebrew Scriptures equally influenced early Christian writings. The Hebrew Scriptures offered no stories of heroes descending into the underworld. There was no Jewish Odysseus or Aeneas. But the early Christians inherited two Hebrew words for the afterlife that shaped the way they thought about hell. And you may have heard both of these: Sheol, S-H-E-O-L, and Gehenna, G-E-H-E-N-N-A. Sheol means the underworld, a place of darkness where souls lived in silence and forgetfulness. It appears many times in the Old Testament. It's sometimes described as a sort of prison with gates and bars. Sheol was generally reserved for wicked people, but it was not a place of torture. Gehenna is derived from the Hebrew Gehinnom, the valley of Hinnom, a site on the southern city of Jerusalem, where, and at least one source cites this. I know there's those who do not cite this, but I will cite it because it was there. On the southern side, this valley on the southern side of the city of Jerusalem, where the Israelites, remember when they always would go into idolatry, they would always turn their backs on the one God and do something that he didn't want. You think of the golden calf, for example. But here the Israelites are accused of sacrificing their children in fire when they forgot about the God who loved them and instead worshiped the Canaanite god Molech. For this idolatry, God sent the Babylonians to punish them and lead them into exile. We know that as a Babylonian captivity for 40 years, the years 598 to 558 BC. When the exiles returned, the Israelites did something else with that valley place. They treated the valley as a place that is cursed, where rebels against God would be punished. So now they're back in a relationship with God, and if they have enemies of the one God, then that's where they are punished. And there is a citation at the end of the prophet Isaiah that alludes to this. Let me read it to you. It's Isaiah chapter 66, verse 24. And they shall go forth and look on the dead bodies of the men that have rebelled against me. For their worm shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. Early Christians adopted Gehenna as the equivalent of the ancient notion of Tartarus, the worst place you could go, the destination of the wicked who merited punishment after death for their sins. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus warns his apostles directly. So this is Jesus speaking in the Gospel of Mark. And you're going to, most of us will remember this passage because we've heard it read during church at times. So it's Mark chapter 9, verses 43 to 48. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter the life maimed than with two hands to go to hell. The Greek is Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter the life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell, Gehenna. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, Gehenna, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. The earliest Christians recognized the Jewish patriarchs and the Jewish prophets as messengers who foretold the coming of Christ. So here's a question. Would everyone who lived before Jesus lived, including those patriarchs and prophets, would they be damned to eternal torment simply because of what one scholar says is the bad timing of their birth? They were born too soon. Augustine of Hippo, great Augustine of Africa, lived from 354 to 430 AD, argued that Christ descended into the underworld after his death on the cross to rescue the Jewish patriarchs and prophets who had expressed their faith in him as a hidden mystery. Because of their faith, they did not reside in hell, but in a place adjacent to it known as you've heard this phrase, the bosom of Abraham, where they awaited Christ's birth in peace. Augustine and others found evidence of this in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. So I'm going to close with this parable. It comes from Luke's Gospel, 16th chapter, verses 19 through 31, and you're probably going to remember this as well. Remember hearing it. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. think we're back. Let's start over. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores, who desired to be fed what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy upon me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things, but now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. From Luke. So I hope you've enjoyed this short presentation on some thinking about hell in older civilizations before our own faith of Christianity developed. And I encourage you to continue watching this series. This is session 2 of the series, What is Hell? Thank you so much for listening.